This is an interactive presentation designed to stimulate discussion and illustrate the importance of critical thinking. It can be used by an instructor in a classroom or by an individual if you're instructing yourself. Simply think about and respond to the questions before you proceed to the next slide. Today we're working on a 08 Chevy Uplander. And when it came in, the basic complaint is that the check engine light is on, it's running bad, and it kind of bogs down, and there's black smoke coming out the tailpipe. So as you know, anytime the check engine light is on, the first thing we do is hook up the scanner and read the codes. Now the codes that we had was P0134, oxygen sensor circuit inactive, bank 1, P0171B, bank 1 system lean, and P0300 random misfire, and the last code was a P2A00 O2 sensor range performance problem. So you will notice here that there are two O2 sensor codes. One is P0134 insufficient activity, and the second was P2A00. Now the scanner's description of P2A00 was a range performance problem, but when I checked the service manual, it gave a more detailed explanation as a range performance problem during closed loop. So if these computers are so smart, why are there two different codes, and what is that telling you? A good heated O2 sensor should reach operating temperature within a few seconds. If the PCM doesn't see a switching signal above a half a volt for over 30 seconds, it will set code P0134. As the engine continues to run and warm up, the PCM continues to monitor the other data, and it knows the engine is running and warmed up, but the O2 doesn't switch for over 100 seconds, which is a minute and a half. It will set code P2A00. The first code, P0134, is telling us that the O2 sensor is indicating that the engine is lean because the O2 is switching, but not above a half a volt like it should be. And the second code, P2A00, is telling us that the engine has run long enough that it should have been in closed loop by now, but it isn't, so it's still running in cold start strategy, and that would explain the black smoke out of the tailpipe. So we got four codes. Two of them are oxygen sensor related. One is a random misfire, and the fourth one is a lean situation. So what could this be? Obviously what we like to do is kind of think it through first and see what it could be. Oxygen sensor problem and a lean code, that could be related. And the fact that we've got a random misfire, if the engine is running lean, it could develop into be a random rather than a specific misfire. So when we stop to think about these, an oxygen sensor, a random misfire, and a lean situation, it all is kind of making sense that it's pointing towards the oxygen sensor being a problem. Now it'd be pretty easy here just to kind of jump to conclusions and say let's throw an oxygen sensor in it. But really the smart thing is prove this, find the evidence. So we're going to use a Genesis this time and actually look at the data stream. Now we've got all of our data parameters showing, and we've kind of pre-selected here long-term, short-term, oxygen sensor 1.1 and oxygen sensor 1.2 at the very top. And we can watch our data over here. Now we actually like to graph some of these, so I'm going to go up to the oxygen sensor 1.1. So the only one we're actually going to be graphing is the oxygen sensor bank 1 sensor 1. Right there. Now we can see that it is switching. If you're not familiar with the Genesis, this is the live data, and this lighter portion is kind of like a magnifying glass. It's zoomed in. But we can see that we're switching, But if we look over here at our data, you can see that we're really only switching 0.3. So the negative is 0.02, not the negative, but the low range. And the highest it's doing is 0.37. Now we're going to accelerate it a little bit and see what happens as we rev the engine. Now when we just stepped on the accelerator, we flooded it with fuel momentarily, and the oxygen sensor should have gone up to 0.9 and stayed there, but you can see that it didn't. It just stayed at 0.3. So the oxygen sensor is switching, but it's only switching between 0 and 0.3. For those of you who might need a little refresher on oxygen sensors, a normal oxygen sensor should read between 0 and 1 volt. Most typically, it'll range between like 0.1 and 0.2, all the way up to either 0.8 or 0.9. It should be fluctuating like that. And what ours is reading is fluctuating between like 0.1 and 0.3. So it is switching, but it's switching at the low range, and it is never crossing above half a volt, 0.5. A good oxygen sensor should switch above and below a half a volt many times, just over and over again. Now ours is not. Ours is staying below a half a volt. So is the O2 sensor any good? Well, one of the ways that we test an O2 sensor that is switching but not above a half a volt like it should be, and it's reporting a constant lean condition, is to try and drive it rich, see if we can make it report rich. And we do that with a propane enrichment test, where we take propane, which is a fuel, add it to the incoming air, which should make the O2 sensor see it and start reporting rich. And then we take the propane away and it should report lean again. You know, I've always said, let the evidence lead you to the problem. Well, remember the black smoke out the tailpipe? Well, that is evidence and can only be caused from a rich running engine. And look at the fuel trims. They're negative. The PCM is pulling fuel away, even though the oxygen sensors are reporting that the engine is lean and therefore indicate that you should be adding fuel. So because of the evidence, the black smoke and the negative fuel trims, a propane enrichment test at this point would not be indicated. What do you think the problem is? Post your comments and we'll continue with part 2.